Today has been the day where I get to introduce people who knock my socks off, I think is the moral of this story. And our next speaker is another one of these examples of people who are doing things that I never could have done when I was their age and when I was in their position. Our next speaker is Katelyn Campbell, who graduated about 1 year ago from George Washington High School in Charleston, West Virginia, where she served as the vice president of the student body. During that year, she spoke up against an abstinence-only presentation at her school, which she decided was maybe not so cool and not so scientific, and that maybe shouldn't be a school-sponsored required event. And the ensuing media storm was probably about as unexpected as Kaylee's hurricane. But Katelyn has weathered that storm well and has gone on to become an outstanding student leader at Wellesley College. Wellesley. Yeah. In what state are you in? Massachusetts. See, I'm learning my geography today. And where she is continuing to be a secular activist and advocate for sex ed and reproductive rights. So I'm going to turn over the stage to Katelyn Campbell, where she's going to share her story.
Thank you. So before I get started, I'm going to warn you that I gave blood yesterday, so if I look like I'm going to die at any point, I'm not. I just was pale to start with, and now I'm a pint low on blood. So I'm going to begin by saying that my story didn't start as one about my religious beliefs. My story started because I believed in science. So let's take a walk back to April of 2013, about a year ago. I had just gotten back from my spring break. I was actually here visiting Ohio State, looking at schools because I'd just gotten accepted and was checking out all of my options. And I got a call from my student council advisor, Karen Donovan, and we were about to go back to school the next day. And she said, Katelyn, you know, I'm really concerned about this, and I thought you should know. We got a flyer in the staff meeting today advertising an assembly that we're going to be having. And at first I was curious because typically assemblies are announced and students know about them beforehand, and then they aren't mandatory. And so I said, Miss D, like, what is this flyer? And she said, it's an advertisement for Pam Stenzel, who's coming to discuss God's plan for sexual purity with the students. Mr. Aulenbacher, the principal, had decided to tell teachers that they weren't allowed to tell students about the assembly beforehand, and unlike other assemblies, this assembly would be mandatory. So I went to a public school, so I immediately questioned the God's plan for sexual purity. And I've been a secular student. I remember saying I was an atheist when I was 2 years old, so that's definitely something that struck a chord with me. So I contacted other students via Facebook to try to get the message out about the assembly the night before. So if students didn't want to go to the assembly, they could elect to stay off of campus during the assembly or find a place that would protect them from having to attend. In fact, a lot of students, because of the assembly, just didn't go to school that day, which is a comment on the side that really speaks volumes to the necessity of informing students about when things like this are going to happen. But anyway, back on track. So, and prior to the assembly, I coordinated with another student to speak with the principal before it started, saying, you know, if you're going to give this abstinence-only, non-science-based option, you have to also provide a more comprehensive means of sex education for students. But that was intercepted a bit when the other student ran into our principal walking into school. And when he attempted to discuss the assembly with Mr. Aulenbacher, he was told to go inside or he would be suspended. So I guess that gives some more information that will come into importance later. So I go to school. I managed to avoid going to the assembly because I was in one of the few rooms in the building that wasn't checked by administrator to make sure all the students were in the gym. And I was like, you know, I didn't go to this. It's not my place to really say anything. And then afterward, my phone started buzzing. And I was getting texts from members of student council, members of the student body who didn't even really know me, but had my number and knew that I would be the person to contact if something was amiss and if something was just awry in general. And they said, you know, look, people are really uncomfortable. There were pregnant students in that assembly when Pam Stenzel was saying that if you have sex before marriage, you're going to basically hell. Although she didn't use the word God, her descriptions were very much that of like a religious nature. And they said something has to be done because this isn't right and people are upset. So that's when I got into a bit of trouble. I sent 2 emails and here I am. I sent an email to my local newspaper, and I sent an email to my local branch of the American Civil Liberties Union filing a complaint. And 2 days later, I was in my principal's office, and he threatened to call my prospective institution, Wellesley, and have my admission status revoked and have my financial aid taken away. So at that point, I knew that I needed help, and help was there waiting for me. People in my community who I didn't even know existed, who were both active in the secular movement in West Virginia, but were also active in securing comprehensive sex education in schools in West Virginia, called my phone, got my number from people who went to school with me and said, we want to help you. Let us have this meeting with you and talk about what we're doing so you can help us. So I go to this meeting, I meet all of these people who have been working in West Virginia for so long, for 30 years or more, working to secure comprehensive scientific sex education for students, and I loved everything that they had to say, and they told me, look, people are going to go crazy about this, people are going to be angry, and you can either be a martyr for this cause and let people beat you up and not say anything back, or you can fight. And I'm a West Virginian, so we fight. And we left Virginia because we fight, and we're cantankerous, and we want to fight back, and we want it our way. So I said, hell yeah, that's what we're going to do. So I took the calls, even though I'm terrified of talking on the phone. I took the crap from people at school when they walked up to me in the hallway and spat on me and told me that I was worthless and that I didn't deserve to sing at my baccalaureate ceremony. I didn't deserve to speak at graduation. I filed a lawsuit against my principal to prevent him from interfering with me in any way, speaking at my graduation ceremony or singing at my baccalaureate ceremony, which, strange as a secular person, I would be there, but I was invited, so I expected to be able to attend as part of my graduation proceedings, and from interfering with me in any way when it came to going to college. And long story short, that didn't work, because in West Virginia, even though the legal system is supposed to be unbiased and is supposed to be there to help you, it doesn't always. I was told that my case wasn't one for the courts and that I should have just gone to the school board, even though a member of the school board helped pay for the assembly that put me in that position. So my speech at graduation 2 days later was canceled, and people wrote hate letters to the church at which my baccalaureate was supposed to be, asking that I be removed from the ceremony. Luckily enough, my student council advisor's husband was the pastor of that church, so I was able to participate. So I guess the title of my program says that I want to talk about how to be an activist on this issue, but I think, and not just on sex ed, but on having church and state issues in school. But I guess I want to say first that how church and state separation and how my religious beliefs became a part of what was going on with me in sex education. Like I said, this issue first for me was an issue of science. The fact that facts were not being presented in school about an issue that is very close to my heart, and an issue that is very close to a lot of social and socioeconomic problems that are going on in West Virginia right now. My religious beliefs came into play on Facebook, when people would comment back saying, she's a slut, she's a whore, she's an atheist, which I'm not really an atheist. I would consider myself more secular or agnostic. I'm not an angry atheist. I think people have the right to have their own religious beliefs, but I also have the right to not have mine, even though I think I'm correct. So that's when it got into play that it was a religious issue, and that's where people got angry, and that's where people said, she's offending our religious beliefs. That's where people brought up the idea that religion should be in schools. Those kids need that. Maybe they wouldn't be pregnant if we had more religion in school. So that's, I guess, where I want to talk to you about, what I want to talk to you about today, is when people raise that question. Why aren't you teaching religion in school? Well, first, it's illegal, but also, when you say that, people get really angry, and people say awful things to you. I still am afraid to go out in my hometown by myself, because people will still, a year and a half later, say things that will make your hair curl, that are awful. But that doesn't have to mean that you should be afraid to speak out about an issue, because just know that you're right. Knowing that you're right and having at least one other person to tell you that you're right and to hear your story and say I agree with you and that what you're doing is powerful and what you're doing is the correct thing to do and what people around you need, that's what fueled me, at least. And I also want to say, as an activist for secular issues like these, the media is your friend. People always say that the media is going to be hard on you, but I'll tell you right now, as a 17-year-old girl, when I got a call from CNN 2 days after I'd just written a letter to the local newspaper, they were really friendly. They said, you know, we understand you're 17 and this is really scary for you, but we'd really like to talk to you about what you have to say. So my first suggestion to anybody who's getting involved in any issue of secular activism or comprehensive sex education, which is my forte, is that you should definitely contact the media. And if you aren't comfortable doing that by yourself, find anybody in your community that is good at that. Look for organizations like the one I work for currently, West Virginia Free, that have a lot of connections of that sort. A funny sort of anecdote, I show up at this meeting that these people have organized to talk to me about my options, and there's this old man sitting there. It's like, who is that? Why are you here? And his name is Ed Rabel, and he has won 2 Emmy Awards. He worked for CBS and NBC, and like personally knows Fidel Castro, and is from Charleston, West Virginia. He was like, hey, I want to be your press guy. let me tell you what to do when you're talking to the media. So again, like just look for those people in places that you wouldn't expect, that know how to help you, and can show you how to sculpt your words. But then also find solace in yourself. Find solace in the fact that you know that your beliefs are correct and you know you're doing the right thing. A lot of the time in a place like West Virginia, it's hard to do that because I'd never heard of the Secular Students Alliance until I was in college. It's hard to find a community that supports you like the people who are here do. But just find that one person who, even if they don't agree with you on a very fundamental level, like agree with the fact that you're sticking up against something that you think is wrong. Because that kind of support is what gets you through the times when, like, for instance, with me, I would go to school and no one would talk to me all day. And I would come home and like talk to my mom and be like, hey mom, this is happening at school. Like, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to go to school. She's like, well, you know, this you have to graduate, but it's okay, you're right. And then as far as it goes in the aftermath, it's weird because over the past like 9 months or so, for the first like a little bit, once my story broke, I was on the phone all day. Like, but in between class, I do an interview on the phone, and then I go to class, go home, do a few more interviews, and then fly this and that. And then people stop calling you, and you like, it's sort of like what Mr. DeWitt said this morning. Like, you get this rush from people wanting to give you attention and wanting to ask you questions, and then when it stops, you're like, well, is my issue over? Like, is what I've done for nothing? So I think at that point, the best thing to do is to follow up. And now I'm working in a much more undercover role with sex education and with the separation of church and state in schools. But there are always positions for you if you are advocating on a certain issue, and if you are a young person who is willing to stand up and say, even if you are the only person who's willing to stand up and say that something is happening that is wrong. Working in the background is just as fun as being up front and center. And I won't say that any of this was easy. It definitely was really hard. I definitely still have a lot of fear, and like when I come home, like I said, I'm really uncomfortable being out in public. I don't really see any people I hung out with in high school, and I find a lot of solace in just the work I do. I'm working in deep southern West Virginia with youth who really need sex education right now. So it's finding an outlet with those people who you did find that do agree with you, and people who will help you, and people who do share your message. Those are the things that get you through the day, and those are the things that make you a good activist and make you a strong continuing activist. I'd be happy to take any questions. I hate to just like talk to people.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you came to be affiliated with SSA, seeing as secularism is not your, you know, I guess your focus.
Well, I got connected with SSA actually when my story broke. People friended me on Facebook and started talking to me about this issue. And I've never believed in God, like I said, so it was always something that was in my mind. But being secular isn't so much, like, it's not as huge a part of my life as it, like, before my sex ed stuff as it is now. But they started talking to me about their organization and initiatives they're working on, and the idea that there should be safe spaces for secular students as well as there should be for queer, transgender students, etc. So based on the fact that I agreed with your message, I agreed to come here and talk to you guys today about how an issue of activism on like what seems like a completely different topic ended up tied in with the issue of secularism in schools.
So you're saying that they were actually the most effective at outreach to you?
Yeah.
Just out of the blue, they were.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
You said that it was a school board member, I believe, and the principal that had paid for that lecture.
Yeah.
But what were the other teachers in the school? Were they going along with it and on board with it, or were they just kind of stuck doing that because it was their job?
That's what's interesting. There's a huge culture of shame of teachers at my old high school. For instance, my AP Lit teacher was gay, and he was the AFT, which is the American Federation of Teachers, like the union representative at school. And he actually was in my favor, but all of them were so afraid of either being pushed out of their job by being made so miserable that they had to leave, or deliberately fired because they were causing ruckus, that I was literally the only person in that school who was willing to stand up and say, this is what's wrong.
Point of clarification. Did you contact the ACLU because of the assembly or because of the principal's reaction to reactions?
I contacted the ACLU initially because of the assembly, and then after I contacted them, I was in contact with another lawyer in Charleston who dealt more with the issue of my being threatened by their principal. So because another lawyer had taken my case, the ACLU couldn't ethically intervene and argue my case before the court in West Virginia, but they definitely served an advisory role in how I would discuss like legal proceedings and how I would understand the legal nature of what was wrong in the situation that surrounded my case.
Did the school itself get into any like legal trouble for basically breaking the law?
Not really. Basically what happened was I filed for legal injunction against my principal and the my county Board of Education to prevent them from harming me academically or like reputation-wise in any way. And that fell through because we were unfortunate and had a very conservative judge on the case. Under the table, the superintendent of schools actually contacted the organization I work for, West Virginia Free, that works on comprehensive sex education issues, and said, we can't have this happen again. Let's get this rolling, because they've been trying to implement comprehensive sex ed for years without much success. So really, on paper, nothing happened to them, but I think they definitely got a good scare, and they definitely know that if something like this happens again, it's not going to go over well at all.
We had a little conversation. We've got this situation going on down in the Cincinnati, Kentucky area, and I fully plan on using you as a resource. What these organizations do is they gain low-level entry into a school, kind of like what the Gideons do with passing out Bibles. If they show up and there's any opposition, they leave. They don't go into the school. If they show up and there's no opposition, they run their program, and if there's opposition afterwards, then they just don't go back. And they see that as a victory. So it takes students like you speaking up to the ACLU. That's the only way that outside influences like this organization or other organizations can shut this stuff down. So I commend you. You're a very brave person, and I fully plan on using you as a resource with what we're doing in the Cincinnati, Kentucky area. Thank you.
Wait, that's one thing I forgot to say. If you are a young person in high school and you have an issue like this, contact the media. They want you. They want that story. That is like front page material. Every time anything like that happens, like goes viral. If you want to be an effective advocate, be like in high school and contact the media. Let me tell you.
Do you have any advice for people who are like doing sort of media stuff in conjunction with secular people? You know, the media outlets themselves are usually very friendly, but the backlash and your comments and the, you know, and how angry everyone gets at you and your strangers messaging your Facebook inbox and strangers somehow found your email and are sending you all this stuff. Do you have any advice for handling that and for like dealing with it and keeping, you know, just self-care and so on, and also your public image so that both those things.
Yeah. So let me just preface this by saying the week before this assembly happened, I started a course of antidepressants, like, because I have clinical depression. So it was kind of ironic that, like, right after I started taking meds, I like started getting attacked by people online. But I think the best thing to do in that situation is to either not read it, or if you're me, you read it anyway, and just take a step back and think, who are these people? What is their message that they're trying to get across? What is making them feel so angry toward you that they want to send you things that are terrible? And I think the thing that was told to me most was consider the source. And if this person is somebody that you would respect in like everyday discourse, that's a cause for concern. But generally, the correspondence I got, like there was a 10-page letter sent to my house, like basically saying like I was demon, I was going to hell, that like me assaulting my principal, like assaulting that way, was just terrible. If you consider the source and you know that they're not a reputable, respectable person, I think it makes a lot better if you can sort of laugh back and say, oh, these people are crazy.
Since you're fighting for protection of science in schools, with the creationist issue coming up in the South, what can we do to help like support the stopping them from actually getting it into the schools?
I think the best thing you can do, especially in places like West Virginia where people read the newspaper, is write op-eds. Like, write something into the paper that says, like, this is wrong. If you have a constant flow of people reading that idea, it's eventually going to stick in their head. I mean, oh, there we go, I have time. If you have any more questions, I can finish answering questions.
Yeah, you finish that one right there.
Yeah, there's actually a huge controversy about where I'm from. If you search the Kanawha County textbook controversy, in the 70s people were bombing schools because they were trying to teach evolution. So there are definitely, just be vocal and get in people's heads in that area is the best way to be an advocate. Again, thank you guys. I'd be happy to take any more questions afterwards.